the time to go through just about all the questions that were posted. Quickly recap. Our first alim, Maulana Sayyid Hussain Nawab from Jaffrey Center of Atlanta. Our second alim is Maulana Sayyid Rizwan Rizvi. He's a resident scholar at Masjid Ali in New Jersey. Maulana Sheikh Muslim Mahdi, he's a fellow at George Washington University. Maulana Hassan, he's a resident scholar at Shahi Najaf Center in Washington, D.C., Virginia area. And we have Maulana Sheikh Bilal Hussain, he's a resident scholar at SIJ-NY in New York City, or in New York, excuse me. Again, remind everybody, if you have any questions to pose, go ahead and link up to the Slido platform, use the event code 786110. And with that said, we'll just go ahead and dive straight into the first question for Maulana Hassan. Okay, so the first question was, what are the scholars' thoughts on how to differentiate between valid and biased hadith, as it has proven that extremist culture has crept into Islam? So, what are the scholars' thoughts on how to differentiate between valid and biased hadiths, as it has proven that extremist culture has creeped into Islam?
Sure. So, who would like that?
So, if you want to start it off,
Sure.
Maulana Hassan.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome to all of our participants and to our ulama. I believe all of our ulama are now present in the meeting, so we can address the questions to any of our ulama. Just briefly, since as requested to begin, there are two different ways to classify valid and invalid ahadith. One is based on the chain of narration, and one is based on the content. And both of them are valid ways, but neither one works by itself. So it's possible that you have a very reliable chain of narration, but the hadith is not accurate, because even reliable people do make mistakes. And even fake ahadith sometimes have a forged chain of narration that's fake, but it's made to look like it's a very good chain of narration. And similarly, sometimes there is a hadith that is a weak hadith, but it's actually a reliable and an authentic hadith. To give an example, sometimes the soldiers of Umar ibn Sa'ad in Karbala, they were narrators of the events of Karbala. So they're unreliable people. They're the most evil people in the world, but what they're narrating, the content of what they're narrating, is true. So sometimes the chain, it's not enough. And that's why you also need to look at the content. The content, according to the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, it should be something that is in agreement with the general principles laid down in the Quran. It should be in agreement with the ruling of our aql, our intellect, and our fitrah, our God-given moral nature and conscience. And that is with the content. So that's not enough by itself as well, because sometimes we don't have any way to definitively say this content is right or this content is wrong. So we use both of them together. The chain, who narrated it, and the content, what is it that the hadith says? And together that gives us a more comprehensive picture of what is authentic.
Excellent. So that makes perfect sense. So the second question came, Salam, did Imam Ali alayhi salam and or Imam Hassan alayhi salam tried to return back to the Garden of Fidak to the family of Bibi Fatima? If not, does that justify the previous caliphate?
All right. I guess I'll take this, right? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are some ahadith that point to these issues. Number one, time had passed since the incident of Fadak's usurpation, and there was no need for Imam Ali to speak of it after so many years. And there's a riwayat from Abu Basir that he asked our sixth Imam why Imam Ali didn't repossess Fadak after he had come to power. Imam responded, because both the oppressed and the oppressor, those who deprived her of Fadak, had died, and Allah had given the reward and the compensation and the punishment to both. And therefore, Ali ibn Abi Talib didn't like the idea of returning a property in which its usurper had been punished and the one usurped from it had been rewarded already. This is, it says, فَقَالَ لَهُ لِأَنَّ الظَّالِمَ وَالْمَظْلُومَ قَدْ كَانَ قَدِمَ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. So that's one reason behind it. Second is sacrificing personal benefits for higher and universal goals. A person asked our seventh Imam the same question. Imam responded that our household, the progeny of the Prophet, whose guardian is Allah, he's the one who makes sure that what belongs to us comes back to us. And we are the guardians of the people and make sure what belongs to them returns to them. But we don't like to take back what belongs to us. Having said that, it's good to see what the fate of Fadak was, after it happened, after what happened to it, and the martyrdom of Imam Ali. What historic records say that if, after Amir Sham took power, he divided it amongst Marwan, Amr ibn Uthman, and his own son. During Marwan's rule, he took control of all the Fadak, and he granted it to his son Abdul Aziz, who later granted it to his son Umar, and then Umar ibn Abdul Aziz gave Fadak back to the descendants of Bibi Fatima Zahra salamullah alaiha. After his death, it once again fell in the hands of the Umayyad dynasty, remained there. In the Abbasid rule, it was given to Ahl Bayt's family, but when Mansur al-Dawaniqi came into power, he took it back. And then it continued to be returned and taken until after the time of Mamun. So during that era, Fadak was considered a political issue and wasn't looked at as a financial asset, because the Khalifas of both dynasties were in no way of need of the Prophets. It yielded, they had enough money of their own. So that is why when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz returned it, the Umayyads scolded him, saying, by doing so, you have rejected the first and the second caliph who refused it in their times. So this is the reason why the later Imams, did not go after it. First of all, because it's a personal thing for them to go after it. It'll be like, okay, they're going after what is their personal benefit. Now that they're in power, they're going to go ahead and run after their own benefits. That is something which could have easily been, pointed toward them. So these were some of the reasons why Masumin refrained from doing so. And then plus all of these other caliphs, or the rulers rather, who came in, they returned it, they gave it back, and then they took it back, they gave it back. This was continuously happening even until the time of the Abbasid Empire.
Santum, may I just add a brief comment? I think the most important thing that Maulana Rizvi mentioned, Maulana Rizwan Rizvi mentioned, is that Fadak was a political and not a financial issue. And just to illustrate that point, there's a narration that in the time of Harun, the Caliph Harun told Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi salam that I'm going to give you Fadak, take it from me. And Imam Kadhim alayhi salam says, "La akhudhuha illa bihududiha." I'm not going to take it except if you give it to me with the full, the full borders of Fadak. So, what is the border? Harun said. The Imam said that the southern border is Aden in Yemen. The second border is Samarkand in the north. The third border is Africa in the west, and the fourth border was the Caspian Sea and that region. So the Imam was saying that Fadak was for the authority of Ahlul Bayt. And don't think that you can return just that small property and then pretend that you have done justice. That illustrates that it wasn't the property of Fadak that was important at all. It was the authority of Ahlul Bayt and their imamat that was symbolized by the Prophet's gift of Fadak to Lady Fatima. Ahsantum.
Jazakallah. So I think the next question was for Maulana Nawab. After Maula Ali alayhi salam, how politically active were our imams? After Hazrat Mukhtar taking revenge of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, why wasn't fourth Imam took over? Why didn't the fourth Imam take over after that?
Yeah, but Imams were like the politically active in the sense they are supporting the good people. They are not like the giving power to like the bad people, but they were never seeking any like power as a ruler to rule on that, because after Karbala, Imam Zainul Abidin had no time for that, number one, because all the time Yazid army and after all the Khalifa came, they were so vigilant on Imam Ali ibn al-Hussein. They were never allowing Imam to go and preach openly. So that is the one reason Imam never like they seek any power or never like they try to like the waste his energy on that side. He want to like the save all the like the followers and make them a true believers so they can propagate, as you are hearing in like the Imam Zainul Abidin Salam Shahadat Majalis. Imam like at least last time one of our scholars mentioned very nicely, more than 1,000 and more than something 10,000 like the slaves were trained by Imam Zainul Abidin Salam. So that was more important to rule on the peoples. And recently I have like the one speech, he say Imam have very big like the title. He say Fatih Qalbha, means he win on the hearts. He live in the heart of the people. So Imam like the main goal to give the people the right religion and increase the love of Ahlul Bayt in their hearts so they can continue in that. But seeking like the power on territory, that was no goal of any Imam. Since Imam Ali alayhi salam or any Imams, they want to like the serve the people as a, but in our like the religion, this siyasat or like the political like wing and the religious wing is not separated. Both are same. If in sense of like politics, Islamic politics, as Imam Khomeini said, if you have power, if you have ability, if you have like the like means to use for good cause, and that is the main siyasat, means whatever resources you have used in justified way to give the people the right and provide facility for them so they can live a good life. So that was the purpose of the Imam. The Imam normally, because they are representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are like vicegerent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this case, their main purpose is to educate the people, to give the religion so they can create a good environment. But whoever come to Imam and try to get like the permission to take revenge or at least like the limited like their power, whoever tried to like the destroy the follower of Ahlul Bayt, Imam indirectly gave them permission and also warned them if they go and fight, whatever consequences are there. So one of like the Imam's relative, he came to Imam and said, I'm going to come and take revenge of Imam Hussein Salam Shahadat. Imam said, go away, but this is the consequences you're going to face. And then Mukhtar came, Imam's indirectly support, but not directly, because that was threat for Imam's life and his mission. So we cannot say Imam was not like the politically active, but we can say Imam was not seeking the power in the sense of ruling as other rulers was occupying the territory. Imam's main purpose was to educate the people, give them knowledge, and then slowly come toward the way, because the last point is very important, because when Imam Zaman are going to come, he's going to establish a government for all over the globe. There was not his, like the power not going to be limited. He's going to like establish the government for whole over the world. And the Imam Zaman alayhi salam, whatever he liked to do, the Prophet started that mission. So in between Imam Zaman and the Prophet, other Imams never get like the good follower to do that things. Imam want that thing. Imam want to get the power, because someone came to sixth Imam and said, why Imam, you're not like the just standing against these all the like oppressor rulers. Imam said, if I had that much like the people, he gave like the indication there was some like the cattles were there. Say if that much like the followers I had, I able to like the stand against them. And again, from the Harun al-Makki came and he sit in the like the fire, and then Imam said, if I have few of them like that, I surely stand up against these all the corrupt rulers. But I don't have support. Imam never had good support to stand up against them. So Imam was doing their duty. They're politically active. They try to like the bring the people in the form of good followers to support Imam, but Imam never gets, and none of our Imam get support to politically establish a government.
So just to recap, though, basically what I'm hearing is politically they were involved somewhat, but I think the more of the focus was education, public knowledge, public seeking of making sure that the rightfulness or righteousness activities are taking place. Is that valid?
You see, this is the three part. Number one, we cannot say Imams were not politically active. They were politically active. They try to establish government if they get support. So never they get support. So they never like the try to change the government and come into power. But we have like the two answers. Number Imam Zaman are going to come establish his government, so that if the other Imams is not likely to that, why Imam Zaman are going to do? So Imam Zaman are going to follow the same things which are unable to perform by our Imams. So this is one part. Number two, they never have a good supporters, enough support to do these things. But if other people like Mukhtar and other people came and seek like the permission from Imam, indirectly Imam giving them permission to go and do their act. But Imam also warned them, this is the consequences. You're unable to establish the government, or we're not going to come and support you politically. That was like Imam's stand at the time. Because all other Imams were in prison, they have no chance. And you have another question is going to come, inshallah. We're going to elaborate in that case when Imam Ali Salam, why Imam Ali Salam accept like the from Harun Rashid, and he accept his like the become his vicegerent, or like this is the another question we're going to come, inshallah. Some other scholars going to enlighten that, or if I get chance, inshallah, I can give you more detail about it, inshallah. What was Imam's like the point of view at the time when he asked the Vilayat Ahdi from Harun?
Inshallah.
Yeah, if I can just one thing, Ahsantum Maulana, the second part which says, after Hazrat Mukhtar took revenge, why didn't fourth Imam take over? So it seems like people think that, after Mukhtar, a Thaqafi who took the revenge, things were now back to normal again. After he took the revenge and he sent the heads to fourth Imam, who appreciated Mukhtar's effort, and Mukhtar himself never wanted the rule. And there was Ibn Zubair who declared his caliphate after Yazid's death. And then his son Mus'ab, after the victory over Mukhtar's men, surrounded him and eventually came to kill him. And Mukhtar came out with 90 men. This whole thing is mentioned in Mukhtar Nama as well, where he was surrounded by Mus'ab, son of Ibn Zubair, and he was killed by his orders. So these situations were not suitable for fourth Imam to think about taking over, for example, or taken over where. So somehow it's presented as if things were all back to normal after Mukhtar al-Thaqafi had taken the revenge, after 3-4 years of Karbala. No, they were not back to normal. And the conditions were actually this part that Karbala's revenge was taken to an extent was there. But it wasn't that, Imams had the path now paved for them to go ahead and take up some sort of ruler or leadership role at that moment. Yes, there are Imams, but the caliphate or that concept, why didn't he take over as if things were normal for him? I think that's sort of misunderstood. Sorry, I just wanted to interject with that.
Excellent.
The next question is actually for Maulana Rizwan. So the question is, Salam, we have 5 Babul Hawaij. How were they told of that status? Who informed us?
Um, I think maybe they'll enlighten me. I've heard of 3 Babul Hawaij. This title of Babul Hawaij being associated with 3 in particular: 7th Imam, Imam al-Kazim, Hazrat Abul Fadl Abbas, Qamar Bani Hashim, and Hazrat Ali Asghar. These are the 3 who are associated with. Maybe other ulama would enlighten me if there are others. But just to answer this question, Hawaij, is a plural for haja, which means need or wish. And Babul Hawaij means the door where hajat are answered. Therefore, all of the Masumin are, Abwabul Hawaij. So it's not particularly these 3, because we believe Shafa'at from all of them. That's why we recite Dua Tawassul and we mention all 14 Masumin in it. But why only 3 earned this title and who gave it to them? The same way when a sick person calls upon, the names of Allah, for example, Ash-Shafi, or when the person is buried in debts, they would call upon Al-Ghani, or they're drowned in sins, they will do tawassul with Al-Ghafur. Similarly, it is mustahab to ask Allah by the names of Prophet Muhammad, Bibi Fatima, her sons, Ma'sumin, and even, in fact, their family members. So it is possible that the hajat of the people were granted in excess by these 3, as referred to as Babul Hawaij, than the others, because majority of the people referred to them. Therefore, this title was awarded to them by their followers. Otherwise, all of the Masumin are Babul Hawaij, and it's not, limited to just these 3 names.
Just before we continue, I think there might be some confusion some participants have. I've seen some questions come in the Zoom window. I think there is a Slido form for the question, so I don't know for our host how you'd like to manage.
Yes. So what I've basically done is we do ask everybody to post questions on the Slido form. What I did is I went ahead and took all of the questions that were posted in the chat, and then I moved it into the running spreadsheet that all of you have access to, so that everything is basically deposited into one list, if you will. And I'm doing the same with the Slido questions, as I'm just continuing to post on the Google spreadsheet as well.
Jazakumullah.
So there was the next question. Let me go ahead and pull that up. This is for Sheikh Muslim. Salam. If our imams alayhi salam are the imams for all, including animals, how did the horses trample the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. What I understood from the question, that if the question is referring to the vilayat of Imam to the animals. So if that is asked in this question, we know that the Prophet of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he sent him as a prophet, he is the prophet for the whole universe. So that includes humankind and jinns and animals and all the creatures. And we have examples in prophetic history where we look at different animals, even the lifeless creatures like pebbles, they are reciting, for instance, Shahada, or affirmation of the Prophet. So it shows that they were given this opportunity to express that vilayat which they had for the Prophet. And Imams, being the representatives and wasi of the Prophet, they had same vilayat. Hence we have, for instance, a riwayat in which some of these stones are mentioned that, for instance, Aqiq, that this stone has testified the vilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Or in some of the hadiths that vilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen was presented to all the creatures. So That shows us that Imam has the vilayat over all the creatures, being the representative of the Prophet and representative of Allah, Khalifatullah fil ard. However, the question which is asked, if these horses had the vilayat, or these horses were under the vilayat of Imam Hussein, why they trampled the body of Imam Hussein? So it's a very tricky question, and it is very important to understand that human beings, they have better rank than the animals. But at the same time, they decided to go against Imam, the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the day of Ashura. The animals, they were forced to do that action. So we have the examples of the horse of Imam Hussein showing the love and affection. We read that in the book of Maqatil, how specifically the horse of Imam Hussein expressed the emotions and sentiments to the Imam. But at the same time, if an animal is forced to do something and had no other choice, yes, they had to go through that. But at the same time, if they had this choice to express their love and their sense of submission to the Imams, they have shown that. We have some of the historical narrations, for instance, in Bihar al-Anwar or Muntaha al-Amal, if I'm not mistaken, a story from the time of Mutawakkil or Imam Hadi, who claimed to be Zainab, and she was tested by Mutawakkil because someone suggested that animals are also under the vilayat of Imam. So if you want to test this lady, put that lady in the cage of the lions, and if she is right, no one would affect. So no animal would harm her. So in a nutshell, that when she was asked to go in that cage, she refused to go into. And then everybody asked, and this is the time we have to ask Imam Hadi to go into that cage. If he is true Imam, he's right Imam, then these animals would not kill him. But if they kill, so it was their purpose which is served. So we know from that historical account that this lady refused to go, and when Imam went, all these lions, they went to Imam, they paid their respect and did not harm. So summarizing this question, yes, all the creatures are under the vilayat of Imam of their time, and they show that respect and reverence. However, if they were forced to do an action which is against their limited will, yes, they go for that. That does not mean that they are not under the imamat.
Would anybody else like to chime in on that or move on?
I can just chime in quickly. Sorry. Mashallah, thank you very much. Sheikh Muslim covered it from a very holistic view, from coming from all the way, the vilayat of Masumin. But just on the actual, he did refer to this, and some just reiterating his words. The reason is that Imam wanted every possible musibat to come upon him, and wanted the horses to trample, to increase the level of the Mazlumiyat. And therefore horses were supposed to do this out of obedience, because we find another case where Mutawakkil Abbasi, he wanted to destroy the grave of Imam Hussein, and he actually wanted to completely make it disappear. And to do this, he sent these cows to go ahead and trample or to destroy in Hidam of the graves. This is in the history. But these cows refrained from doing it because this is where they were under the obedience to not do this. They did not go over this. Or even in reference to Harun Rashid in his time, when the grave of Imam Ali was discovered, he sent his horses, when he was hunting, the horses stopped at one place and they did not go forward. Out of the respect. That's where the grave of Imam Ali was, which was then discovered. So while these other animals, they acted according to the obedience, In case of Imam Hussein, it was actually the obedience was to go ahead and do this so that it will increase in the mazlumiyat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Wallahu alam.
And one thing that helps, I don't want to add to the answer, I think Maulana Chalum and Maulana Rizwan gave an excellent answer, but it sometimes helps for us to distinguish between mashiyya and irada of Allah. Irada, one of the meanings at least, is what Allah wants us to do. Mashiyya is what occurs in existence. And sometimes what occurs in existence is for a higher purpose, even if Allah doesn't want it. So Allah did not want people to oppress Imam Hussein. That was not his irada, it was not his command, but it was his mashiyya, meaning through the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and the horses trampling and everything that took place, the sacrifice and the honor of Imam Hussein became clear. So if you distinguish, irada is what Allah says is good, and mashiyya is what Allah allows to happen for some higher purpose. Not because it's halal or it's good for us to do it, but because it's good for the universe to have that event take place and that example be there. That might help the confusion, because a lot of times our questions are confusing the command of Allah, the irada tashri'iyya of Allah, and the will of Allah or the mashiyya of Allah.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So the next question is it's kind of odd. I don't know. It's for Sayyid Suleiman. This year, why there was a disconnect on the day of Ashura? Why there wasn't an agreement on this, and how will it impact going forward on young generations? I'm not 100% sure as far as what that disconnect.
Yeah, there's a long answer I can give and a short answer I can give. And I'll give the short answer. If there's any follow-up, then people can ask a follow-up question. But basically, what we think of as the single date is not an astronomical reality. There's something on a map called the International Date Line. You can look it up. It's a line of longitude between Alaska and Russia, and it goes down through the Pacific Ocean. That's an artificial line that says on the right side of that line, it's still Monday. On the left side of that line, it's now Tuesday. The Islamic calendar is always going to have a disconnect, because the line between when the previous month ends and the next month begins is going to be a line based on either the sighting of the moon or the visibility of the moon. And so just like on the International Date Line in Alaska, it's yesterday, and in Siberia, it's tomorrow. Similarly, if that astronomical line falls in New York, then in New York, it will still be Dhul Hijjah, and in New Jersey, it will be Muharram, for example. If the line falls in Michigan, then on the east of that line, it will still be the previous day, and on the west side of that line, it will be the next day. So in reality, it shouldn't be a disconnect. The Islamic calendar is actually operating according to astronomical realities. It's our calendar that is fake. The International Date Line is a fake line. They just chose it because there's very little land and it's all ocean, and so it's not a big deal. But it's a artificial line. Different fatwa exist, and based on different fatwa, there will be a different line on the map for the beginning of the month, the visibility curve or the sighting curve and so on. But in all of those different fatwas, in all of those cases, it will be a line that's based on an astronomical reality or an observed reality, and not a fake line. So the problem here, is it's kind of like, for example, if I say, well, why does Zohar time change when daylight savings time comes? It's not that Zohar time changes. Zohar time is still at Zawal. The clock changes. That's the problem of the clock, not the problem of Zohar. So the problem
That's politically driven, right? The daylight savings times, or it's more of a consumer mindset.
It's politically driven, and the same thing applies to the international dateline. The Islam, if you plot on a map the Islamic calendar, then every month, whether New York has one Eid and New Jersey has a different Eid, or whether Eastern United States has one Eid and Western United States has a different Eid or a different Ashura or whatever, although there are different fatwa that also have an effect. But the bottom line is that whichever fatwa you apply, that line is going to be drawn on the basis of not a political decision, but on the basis of either the visibility of the crescent or the sighting of the crescent or nightfall within the area of sighting based on the different fatwa. But it's a real observed or astronomical reality. So it's not the Islamic calendar that has a disconnect with nature. It's our secular calendar that has a disconnect with nature. Now, this year, the problem was not because of different fatwas so much. The problem was because the line fell in an inconvenient place for many people. But sometimes there will also be a disconnect because of different fatwa. And the answer to that is very simple. That in Islam, Allah wants each of every one of us to have our conscience. So if Allah had said, you can only follow marja X, there would be no dispute. Everybody would have the same Eid, the same Muharram, the same Ashura, and so on. But when Allah says that Zayd, Fatima, Zainab, Hassan, Taqi, everybody, you have the ability to choose your own marja. That's to respect your freedom of choice. And it means that some people might reach a different taqleed, and they might, somebody says this is najis, somebody says it's not najis. Somebody says this is Eid, and somebody says it's not Eid. It might be a little bit inconvenient, but it gives us agency, it gives us the freedom of conscience to follow the marja and the taqleed that we consider to be the most learned. And that prevents so much corruption, so much centralization of power, and therefore potential for lobbying and politics. It's kept our religion pure. From the time of the Imams until today, study the history, and you will find our maraji, our fuqaha, although they had great political pressure, great oppression, but they remained true to Ahlul Bayt. And why did they remain true? Because people made individual choices of taqleed, and every mu'min, every mu'mina chooses a marja' taqleed based on who they consider to be the most pious. That's through the joint decision of millions and millions of mu'mineen that has kept our system pure and free from the fitna that exists in every other sect of Islam and in other religions. The price we pay is that sometimes there's different fatwas. It's a very small price to pay. And I think that if the youth understand that, then they will become even more appreciative of how much respect Islam has given every mu'min and every mu'mina, that it said, you do the research and you decide. Who do you consider to be the most a'lam? And you follow that person. Nobody has forced you to do taqleed to somebody that you are not comfortable with in your conscience.
That was a very good explanation on the disconnect. Okay, so this is more, I believe, a lot of Indo-Pak residents generally have this. So the question isn't creating a replica of Imam Hussein's shrine and doing salam to a replica considered shirk? And this is for Sheikh Muslim.
Sure. So first of all, we need to understand what is shirk. So first of all, shirk is attributing or associating partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or polytheism. So I do not understand how a person can be mushrik by making a replica of Darih of Imam al-Hussein. So it's obvious there is no shirk in creating a replica of Darih of Imam Hussein, especially it is one of the signs and symbols which are the reminders of the holy personalities, who are the reminders and manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not only shirk, but it is, I think, taking us to the monotheistic approach and taking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one thing, as I just have said, we need to revisit the definition of shirk. It is having several kinds, because I understand sometimes Shia community at large, there are allegations on them that they do shirk because they go to ziyarat and they visit the ziyarat. They have to understand, in fact, the Kaaba, the holy house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala itself, according to many narrations, especially when we look at the verse of Holy Quran, Surah At-Tur, it talks about Baytul Ma'mur. So majority of the scholars and the scholars of Quranic sciences, they have mentioned that this Baytul Ma'mur is the actual Bayt of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in heavens or on the Arsh, and Kaaba is a replica of that. So making replicas and giving the respect to these replicas with that relationship or with that association is not a shirk at all.
Thank you for that wonderful answer. The next question was for Sheikh Bilal. Which one of Bibi Sakina's shahadat is more genuine?
Oh boy, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Fun question. Okay, I'm going to give you guys the short answer. And the short answers I know today are going a little bit long, but I'm going to try to keep it short.
My apologies. That was my mistake.
No, I'm no disrespect intended, Sayyidina. I appreciate, and I think the answer was very concise and clear and didn't need anything added to it, and that's the best answer. When we talk about the personalities in the family of Imam Hussein, and we talk specifically about the women in the family of Imam Hussein, even the family of Imam Ali, there are many discussions about accurately numbering these women, and there are not correct answers to it. Meaning that the women of Ahlul Bayt were personalities who were not very clearly elaborated or presented in public sphere to be known and presented among society. When that happens, and we look back at these riwayat and we try to understand who we're talking about, there are sometimes differences based upon culture, understanding, and narrations that happen. To the extent where the 4-year-old daughter of Imam Hussein is sometimes referred to as Sakina, sometimes referred to as Ruqayya, sometimes they're both referred to as the same person. There are other narrations that say she was known as Sakina, or not narrations, opinions of scholars that say she was known as Sakina in the life of Imam Hussein, and after he passed away, then she became known as Ruqayya. My point in saying this is that instead of paying attention to the specific details of the incident, the purpose of these events is to connect us to personalities as a wasila to attain proximity to Allah. If we keep that as the fundamental, these differences, whatever our culture represents, is acceptable. As a matter of fact, even amongst the explanations of our ulama and our senior ulama is that you'll see differences in cultures and how they observe these sha'air of Imam Hussein. There's differences of how we execute these things. There's differences of the dates that we take as consider as valid. Instead of focusing on these differences, it's okay that we have different dates. It's okay that there are different times when these events happen. The more important thing is that there is a personality at the center of this, and that we attach ourselves to that personality. The same way, to get the wasila of Imam Hussein, I don't need to go to Karbala. I can get the wasila of Imam Hussein here now. My attachment to the Imam is based upon my aqidah and my interest and my sincerity and my intention of getting close to him. So when we talk about, for example, the commemoration of the shahadat of the daughter of Imam Hussein, you'll see different cultures participating in different ways. And our goal is that, alhamdulillah, we have a wasila to attach to this personality that attaches us to Allah and Ahlul Bayt through it. So as long as that happens, don't worry about these things. It's okay. However your community commemorates, that's great. And if there are more communities around you and they commemorate differently, al-fafiyah, even more so. Go to the different events and listen to everywhere and attach yourself to the personality, whatever day it is. That's a short one.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So this one is for Maulana Nawab. What books should we be reading if we're trying to enter the field of Irfan?
Zainab, mic up. Zainab.
One, this is like the very different questions for audience. Maybe if it's some scholars, they are pursuing this path, is okay for them to go for in this field. But as like the audience, they are here, our like the youth, and they are looking for a fun and for perspective of like the getting knowledge about this field is a little bit different. You see, if you go for Irfan in the form of like tasawwuf, which is not permissible in Islam, because that is also Irfan is introduced Islamic is Irfan. But if you go Irfan in the point of view of Ahlul Bayt, that is like God awareness, taqwa, piety, learning more about the Tawheed, bringing more evidence for you. And through that, you have to practice your religion. So your ruh get more like relate to your practices. You can aware of like the your Tawheed and Nabuwat and Adl and Imamat and Qiyamat. If these things are completely like understandable for you, you're able to understand these things correctly, then you have like more concentration in your ibadat. And that take you to the next step. First, you have to complete your ibadat, perform your salat with full concentration, and then you move forward for the next level. Because I have like the 10 or 15 books in front of me for Irfan, but most of them are in Persian and other language. I may be like the take help from these scholars that are sitting here because normally they are more involved in English like literature rather than me. My like the main goal to like read Arabic and Persian books and like compile my other books and also prepare my lectures through that. So I can maybe like to get help from them. But I found one book, it is from like Muhammad Ali Shumaili. It's a 101 ways to concentrate in your salat. If you really learn your salat correctly and you have full concentration, 2 rakat salat, you read without diverting your mind, that is the best thing for you to achieve that goal right now. That's your fun. That is your point of like the perfection in your like the ibadat. If you go for the next level to kashf something or like the discover something beyond like the metaphysics, that is like the other level to go. Then you have to start some special zikr, do some special kind of like the amal. There's irfan in like the Imam Hussain salam dua Arafah. This is the best thing to read, understand, and contemplate about the Tawheed Imam taught of us. That is the best irfan we can learn in like the relation of Tawheed from like the Imam Hussain salam dua Arafah. The irfan in like the Hajj, the irfan in like your Salat. There's many other like the aspect which I suggest for the youth to involve in that rather than go in the like the that like the irfan which taught in the Hoza and other places. I don't think that is many like the suitable things for you. But if you are, maybe I ask other scholars if they have any other books regarding Irfan and like the understanding Irfan, they can maybe help me out because they may have some book handy in there like the possession. My books are mostly in Persian. I can give a 15 books name right now I have in front of me. Irfan book from Ayatollah Nasir Shirazi, from like other scholars, all in like the foreign languages. I don't think it's going to be suitable for audience they are listening right now for me. If you have any other English books in your possession, can you just suggest them? But I suggest you to read like the Dua Arafah with English translation and other like the understanding, and that like the 101 like the ways to consider. I have my own book about like the 28 ways to concentrate in your salat. That's the best simplest book to concentrate in your salat. That is like the best fun for you right now. Sheikh Bilal, Sheikh Salman, if you have anything, if you suggest these guys any other books which you may read in English available for them.
I'll say that.
Santo, I think that suggestion of dua is very good. They're accessible in translation, and that's the applied irfan of Ahlul Bayt.
So the next question was for Maulana Rizwan. And I think this may be tied to more of an Indo-Pak thing than across everybody. But the question is does Muharram end on Chalum or Arbaeen, or does it end on Eid al-Zahra? because culturally people like to end Muharram on Eid al-Zahra, but is it true to end on Arbaeen religiously? But technically, Muharram, I mean, the month of Muharram ends at the end of this week, because Saturday I think will be first of Safar, but I think it's more along the lines of the morning of the tragedy of Karbala.
Yeah, you're right. The month of Muharram ends when the month of Safar begins. But our question is referring to Ayyam Azah, as to how long are the Ayyam Azah. So there are cultural preferences, as you mentioned. I know in the Iranian culture, I believe it's the 28th of Safar. That's when they end the Azah, and then they can go back to holding, marriage ceremonies and all that stuff. But in the Indian Pakistani culture, it goes for 2 months and 8 days, until the 8th of Rabiul Awwal, when it's the Shahadat of our 11th Imam. And then 9th of Rabiul Awwal is marked as Eid al-Zahra. Sharia doesn't give any instruction on this matter. It's solely based on our cultural preference. Therefore, I would actually say, a lot of time we look at different cultures and how different people are doing differently. And we sometimes condemn them that, oh, look at so-and-so, they're after Chalum. They're, for example, doing some joyful gatherings, or as if Muharram is over. The Ayyam Azam, Sharia does not give us any instructions over it. It's a cultural thing. So Iranian, they'll go up to Chalum or the 28th of Safar. And Indian Pakistani culture goes up to the Shahadat of 11th Imam.
Excellent. The next question was for Sheikh Bilal. So, as per your session, and this goes back to our session we had before Muharram started, session on Day of Judgment. As a non-scholar, Zikra, how can be one of those people running the line of Imam Hussein alayhi salam versus other imams?
Okay, so brief background for everybody. We were talking about the Shifa, Imam Hussein being Safinatun Najat, and the conversation that the arc of salvation that is Imam Hussein, according to Imam Sadiq, is broader and faster than the arc of salvation of all the other Imams, and that it's one of the easiest ways to get Shifa of the Imam to enter into heaven. Sheikh Muhammad Sanad, Ayatollah Muhammad Sanad, has a really interesting discussion on this as he discusses this. And he elaborates, rather than my own words, I'll share his words, where he points out and he says, if you want to be added to the sha'air, those who commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, you don't just have to be the reciter or the speaker. Anything that you do with the intention of serving Imam Hussein adds you into that list. Whether you prepare the hall, you host the majlis, you serve the food, you invite the guests, you put away their shoes, you clean up the hall afterwards. Anything that you do as service for the sake of Imam Hussein is a way to receive his shifa'ah and to have his intercession on the Day of Judgment. So it doesn't just have to be that you recite. Reciting is great. And honestly, if you recite Noha, Marcia, poetry, spoken word, it has an incredible impact on your personality. It has an incredible impact on your self-development and attachment to these personalities. You go through a process of self-evaluation and commitment as you go through it. But that doesn't mean that that process is any less valid if you serve Imam Hussein in whatever capacity you have. The idea of becoming a zakir is a great thing, or becoming an alim is a fantastic thing, that it's a servant of Imam. But we can all be servants of Imam Hussein. We all just have to make the effort and the endeavor to commit to him and offer our service in his cause.
And I mean, like, if anybody has been to Karbala during Arbaeen, or the walk between Najaf and Karbala, and just looking at the level of humanity that everybody has towards the visitors, I mean, it's incredible. So you're right. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be any one of those things, but you can show love for Imam Hussein in any capacity possible. And I think people in Iraq and abroad, show that every year during Arbaeen, or throughout the year, actually, in some cases.
Alhamdulillah. It's very true.
So this is for I'm going to skip one of the questions, and this is for Sheikh Rizwan again. So, or actually for anybody, what is the one
Sayyid Rizwan, by the way.
What is one most important trait we should incorporate in our children for betterment of their akhirah?
Inshallah, we'll try to be concise moving forward, so I'll keep it very short. There's a very beautiful hadith in this reference from our sixth Imam. He says, خَيْرُ مَا وُرِّثَ الْآبَاءُ وَالْأَبْنَاءَ الْأَدَبُ. The best inheritance one can leave for their children is adab. Now, the ulama will translate the word adab better than me. Civility, proper tarbiyah, discipline, good conduct. So Imam Sadiq said, if you have 2 days left in your life, you spend 1 day learning adab, second day practicing it. I think that's the most important trait that we should incorporate in our children for their akhirat.
Like, okay. Anybody else would like to add anything, or just go ahead, move on?
Alhamdulillah, I think we can move on.
Perfect answer, like that.
Sure.
Prophet said like that, teach your children 2 things. Number 1 is Quran, and that is our love of our Ahlul Bayt. Besides, adab is one of the important. Before, whatever like the brother Rizwan said, is the most important thing. Adab is required. If the adab is not there, the love of Ahlul Bayt and Quran not going to benefit them. And after adab, next is learning Quran, understanding the Quran, and love of Ahlul Bayt is other 2 suggestion made by the Prophet ﷺ for our children.
Exactly.
The next question is for Sayyid Suleiman. So, how can we help guide those who have gone astray? I guess maybe 3 to 5 helpful areas that can help somebody to help others, I guess.
So to begin, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the Quran says to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. So even the Prophet is told that you don't guide whom you will, but Allah guides whom He wills, and He knows best who are the rightly guided. Of course, it is Allah's will and not the Prophet's will, but whatever the Prophet wills, that is in agreement with the will of Allah. So the people who the Prophet wishes to guide, they will achieve guidance, not because the Prophet acts independently, but because the Prophet's will is a reflection of the will of Allah. So some people, they falsely say this verse that I cited was about Abu Talib alayhi salam, and Abu Talib was not a Muslim. That's wrong. He was not just a mu'min, but the highest level of iman. The principle, though, is that we don't want to claim the responsibility of guiding others. That responsibility belongs to Allah. The most we can do is we can try to facilitate. And a couple things can help. Number 1, and I want to explain, I'll just kind of list a few things. Number 1, remember that guidance is a process. So sometimes, a parent says, my children are not praying as well as they should, or they're not attending the majlis. And then we fight with our children or our friends or our spouse to get them to practice. Remember, it's a process and not just, I need to decide this issue today. So pick your fights carefully. Step back if a person is emotional or they're not ready to hear something, it's going to backfire, and then gradually approach it in the future. Number 2, remember that Islam is not practice. Islam starts from the heart. The practice comes. If I feel that it's important for me to be humble, then I will dress modestly. But if I don't feel humility in my heart, even if I'm wearing hijab, I might wear it in a provocative way. Or if I'm a man and I'm dressed modestly, but I might not act modestly. So sometimes we have to focus less on the symptom and the outward practice and more on the origin. So number one, it's a process and not just a static one-day decision. Number two, remember that there is a basis and not just the symptom or the outward expression. Focus on the outward expression, the symptom, and focus on the basis. And the third and final point that I'll make is that sometimes we confuse what is essential with what is non-essential in Islam. Certain things are wajib, like prayer. Certain things are recommended, like adhan, iqama, taqibat. So when we try to enforce a standard that a person is not ready for, we make it more likely that they won't even do their wajibat. And in a saying of Imam Ali, he says, there's no benefit in fada'il if they prevent a person from being able to honor their fara'id, their obligations. So these are some points that can help. But the bottom line is, if we live our life to the best of our ability as a good mu'min, that will help other people also see the value of Islam, because they will see that we are good in our actions, we have peace of mind and tranquility. They will be attracted to the religion and the teachings and the values which they see are so beneficial to us in our lives. And maybe that's the most important thing, as Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said, "Kunu du'atan lin-nasi bighayri alsinatikum." Call people without using your tongue, but by using your actions.
Okay. So just to do a quick time check, it's about 10:08. I think if everybody is okay to go on until 10:30, I think we should stop at 10:30 if everybody's okay with that. No objections. Okay. So the next question is for Sheikh Bilal. So how can we attain better spirituality and not forgo or neglect social family obligations?
So there's narrations of the Ahlul Bayt that teach us that for a man to sit with his wife and children kindly is more rewarding in the eyes of Allah than sitting in Masjid al-Nabawi, spending the night in worship. Meaning, one of the things that we take away from this is that spending time with family and spending time with our relatives isn't separation from spirituality, isn't separation from worship of Allah. Rather, it can be a vehicle to worship Allah. One of the important things we have to remember is one is intention. What's the intention that we approach our tasks and responsibilities with? The same intention that we approach with salah, that my actions in this prayer, my motions, my words, my worship, my dhikr, my intention is for the sake of Allah. We want to keep Allah involved in all of our actions, including when we go and we sit with our family. We show them love, we show them kindness, we show them consideration. These are actions in which we can incorporate in our worship of Allah. The other thing is the practice of patience, the practice of teaching good character and manners, the practice of keeping the remembrance of Allah and Ahlul Bayt in front of others, your family that you're sitting with, are all acts of worship. The two don't have to be separated. What we have to do is we have to be conscientious and careful of the fact that the meetings and gatherings that we're participating in are halal and permissible, and that we use them as a vehicle to remember Allah, and we meet and we love these people for the sake of Allah, because Allah made them our relatives, our family, our community, and we stay attached to them. One of the other really important things that feeds into this, and the wonderful answer Sayyid Sulaiman gave of the previous question, is always be merciful with people. Always be merciful with your family, with whoever's in need. How can you be entitled to the mercy of Allah on Yawmul Qiyamah if you yourself are not merciful to people? Be kind, be patient. These are the attributes that Allah likes to see in His creation. And that's the aspect that we want to promote. And if we're doing that, then even our meeting with our family and spending time with them is ibadat of Allah. Anyone has anything to add?
Okay, so the next question is for Sheikh Muslim. Is it more important to recite Quran daily or recite it accurately, but we know that it can only happen infrequently with a teacher? So I guess what they're saying is it more important to recite the Quran daily without having a teacher so that they are correcting or providing you guidance around your accuracy? What can we do as a society to help others learn the Quran recitation and meaning?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, I would answer the second question first. We have a hadith, خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه, that the best among you is the one who has learned how to read Quran and who teaches others how to read Quran. So the answer to the second question is the best approach is if we value this hadith of the Prophet and other ahadith of Imams of Ahlul Bayt in terms of teaching others, then it becomes a communal responsibility on each of us to teach other people who need help to read Quran. If Allah has blessed us with this opportunity, we can read Quran. So it begins with the family. If I have children and they cannot read Quran, it's my responsibility to teach them how to read Quran. In fact, Maulana Sayyid Nawab referred to a hadith as well, that it is among the rights of children upon the parents, they should teach their children the Holy Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in addition to inculcating the love of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt in their hearts. So it's a communal responsibility on each of us to teach others, especially the people who do not have resources, especially in this society. Perhaps not very easily a good Quranic teacher can be found. And people are struggling, especially to read the Arabic verses or Arabic text of Quran. So whosoever can teach others, that is the best of the jobs. So in terms of reading Quran frequently or infrequently, if we do not have the opportunity to have a teacher or someone who can correct our recitation, there is no doubt that if we are trying to learn Quran and we are not familiar with Arabic alphabet, it's a process and it might take some time. And especially a language needs a lot of practice. And in the discourse of the practice, a person naturally makes mistake. So I would say if the intention is not to disrespect the Quran by reading it mistakenly, there is no harm. In fact, it is encouraged that we should try to read Quran, no matter we are not perfect in terms of recitation. Sometimes makharij, some of us, maybe due to background or due to other difficulties, cannot pronounce some of the alphabets of Arabic as Arabs do. So it should not prevent us from reading Quran. It should not discourage us, and we should be very mindful of ridiculing people who cannot read Quran well. It should not happen. In fact, we should encourage especially the youth, because we have plethora of hadiths which are talking about the recitation of Quran by youth. In fact, one hadith says that if someone who is a youth or at a very young age reads Quran, qara al-Quran, so understanding is indeed a higher step, but mere recitation of Arabic text, وَهُوَ شَابٌ مُؤْمِن, this is by our sixth Imam, that this youth is a believer. اختلط القرآن باللحمه ودمه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mix his blood and his flesh with Quran. And on the day of judgment, there will be a call. Read the verse of Quran, اقرأ warqa. Read the verse of Quran and go to higher status, because the statuses or the stations of the paradise are attributed or associated with the verses of Quran. Yeah.
Thank you. And like just as a small advice to our audience too is, forming like small groups and having Zoom sessions or having, WebEx, just so that you understand or recite it with each other, on a set day, set frequency, certainly helps as well with that. So just a small advice on that. So the next one is for Maulana Rizwan. In general, any pieces of advice to make our society community better?
When this is a long time ago, when I was in Chicago about 20 years ago, the community was forming. There was this very good piece of advice that was given to take in account as how to make your community better. TPC, tolerance, participation, and contribution. Tolerance means a commitment to tolerate differences in our faith, opinions, and others' weaknesses. Participation is a commitment to regularly participate in the programs that are held in your community centers, in your masajid, in your imam bargas, and not just one, all different centers that you have, regardless of the distance or your individual schedules. When possible, attend these programs in other centers. In doing so, we will make great strides towards unifying and strengthening our community. Even holding programs, which are big programs in congregation together. And lastly, contribution, a commitment to enable our centers to continually improve their services with regular and generous donations and contributions. So tolerance, participation, and contribution.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I believe we may be to our last question for the night, but let's see. So this one's for Maulana Suleiman. So most of the decisions we make in our life are to satisfy our parents and respect them, as instructed by the Prophet, peace be upon him. However, many young Muslims choose a career path or a spouse as pressured by their family, but end up in extreme mental distress. Okay. It's lengthy. How do we find the middle ground between respecting parents, following religion, and still making these life-changing decisions without harming our mental stability?
That's a very good question. I think it's relevant for a lot of people. But it really helps for us to remember that Islam does not tell us to obey our parents, in the sense that we don't need to just implement the decisions that they made or that they want us to make. What the Quran tells us is وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. We have to do ihsan to our parents. We have to be kind to our parents. The question referred to that as respect. Respect is one form of ihsan. But ihsan is that in the way we interact with our parents, we're always good and kind and noble. It doesn't mean that we obey. In fact, the Quran never says obey your parents, but it does tell us when not to obey our parents. وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ لِتُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. If they tell you to ascribe partners with Allah, then don't obey them. So the Quran does say sometimes you should not obey your parents. It never says that you need to obey your parents. Now, fuqaha have given different fatwa. I won't get into the detail about certain cases where obedience to your parents is necessary. The general principle is that when it comes to your life decisions, if you're an adult and you're able to make reasonable decisions, you make the decision for yourself about what career to choose, where to buy a house, and so on. But in making that decision, you have to make that decision in a respectful way. That might mean you obey your parents' choice. It might mean that you give your parents' choice preference over your own choice. My parents want me, to paint my living room green. I want to paint my living room orange. I choose green over orange for my parents. Or it might mean that you don't do what your parents want, but then you are not, rude about it. So sometimes we obey our parents, but we do so in a rude manner. Fine. If that's what you want, I'll do it. That's obeying, but it's not ihsan. And sometimes we don't obey, but we're very kind and we have ihsan. That thank you so much for your advice. That guidance is always valuable to me, and I always learn and gain from it. And then you call them more frequently, you check up on them more frequently, you visit them more frequently. But then you say that, unfortunately, this time, I think I'm going to make a different decision. And so you have ihsan, but you might not always be following their preference. So in general, again, there are certain exceptions, but in general, for children who are adults and are mature enough to make their own decision, they can make their independent decisions. But generally, ihsan means I give more importance to the preference of my parents than to myself. And if I know that there's a decision that I need to make differently from their preference, then I do so with the maximum kindness and spirit of ihsan. Ihsan is not the same thing as ita'at. Ita'at means obedience. Ihsan means generosity and kindness. Ihsan is the obligation, not ita'at. But sometimes ihsan requires ita'at as well. So sometimes the only way to be kind, if it's a small issue that doesn't affect my well-being, and to take care of it, to do it will make my parents happy, then ihsan requires that I also obey them. In other cases, ihsan does not require obedience. It requires love and respect and humility before my parents.
Great explanation. And so the last question for tonight, in closing, this is for Maulana Nawab. How do we perform, or how do we form a holistic approach integrating both religion and medicine?
With the hadith from Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he say, "Al-ilm al-ilman, ilm al-adyan, wal ilm al-abdan." Prophet said there is like the two important things. One is knowledge of your religion, and other is knowledge of your own body, or especially related to the medicine. So if you go in like the form of this hadith, you can find like the religion and your knowledge of your own body is integrated together. They are not like they separated. The other hadith, man arafa nafsu faqad arafa rabbahu. Whoever knows himself correctly or know his own like the existence, he know his Lord, because all the like the miracles occur in your body. This is one of the proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you say like the Islamic medicine, this is another subject. And if you go in the like the Prophet like Tibbe Islami or Tibbe Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Tibbe Imam Raza, Tibbe Imam Jafar Sadiq, that's other thing. Whatever you do in your life, like normally your parents are cooking something, they use some ingredients and they are related to like the specialist recipes. And around especially you're using for like the saving yourself from COVID-19, there are many like the simple like the remedies are available. These all things are important. These are come from our Masumin, somehow they like the get together. But you can apply like the medicine and like the religion together in form. Whatever you eat halal, there's the shifa in that. And that Allah never put any health or shifa in the najis and haram things. So this is the one unique law. If you go and have your healthy life, always choose the halal and pak. You are always healthy. That is basic law. Automatically applied in your life and you have best healthy life. And other thing Imam said, like the if you apply like the medicine and learn about it, there's like the many other like the possible ways you can go and study and find like the suggestion from Imam. Imam said if you do not want to like the visit any doctor, then do 4 things. Never eat unless you feel hungry. Eat and like the pull your hand from like the your meal before some hunger is left. Chew your food good and just empty your stomach before you sleep. If you do these 4 things, you're always healthy. So these suggestions came from our Masumin in both ways. They suggest some good food to eat, when you eat, how you eat. These all like the medical science. Maybe like not like the taught in our like the schools right now. But if you go in Islamic seminaries, they are teaching right now. They are really celebrating that thing and giving knowledge of like the prophets, like the medical knowledge and this especially Tibbe Masumin available. So we are integrating. You don't think we never apply the Masumin suggestion in life. We are using how you sleep. This is a medical science, how you wake up, when you sleep, when you eat, what you eat, what type of clothes you wear. Like these all things are mentioned. Seasonal things, eat the seasonal food is beneficial for you. Do not eat the food that are not in the season, they are maybe harmful for you. Every field you find in your life, you're going to find a suggestion from Imam, and that is a part of our life. There's only thing, if you convert that act into worship, relate to that message and say, because I'm doing this thing for, or I'm choosing this thing because my Imam is suggested, and that become worship, that become like the ibadat. So religion and medicine is always together in all three forms. Number one, whoever doctors, they choose this field for sake of serving humanity, they receive sawab. If you do anything in your life, in daily life, if you keep like the suggestion of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is considered worship. And other ways, if you learn your own like the body, and this is the last thing because there's no time is left. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam actually proved the Tawheed through that field. Like the Imam started from like the hair of your like the head to toe of your nail, every part of your body, Imam proved the Tawheed through that. And if you study, that is one way around is physiology, and that is related to medicine. So all fields are relation. Tawheed is not understood without learning our own body, and that is learning our own self is one kind of like the medical science. So food wise or learning our own self is medicine. So just concluding or like giving a summary of my answer, Prophet said, ilm al-ilman, ilm al-adyan wa ilm al-abdan. Both are main source of the knowledge. Two branches of like the science is related together, religion and your own existence in your own body. They are related, alhamdulillah, and most of you are following. If you go in more detail about learning what like Islamic medicine is, which is missing right now, we are using like the other medicines, but like the alternative medicines are available, and best alternative medicines are taught by our Masumi. They are available right now, and they are, alhamdulillah, in practice in many countries. If we can bring in our own life, inshallah, we're going to have more healthy and longer life for them, inshallah. I hope
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and so I know there's several chat items posted. So I know we had an overwhelming number of questions, and we couldn't get to all of them. What I've been doing in the background is I'm taking all of the questions that are posted, and I'm adding it to a Google spreadsheet that we're sharing with the scholars. And so I have captured all of the questions, all of the answered questions, as well as the unanswered questions. And you know, if time permits, and if everybody's open to having additional sessions like this in the future, we can continue answering those questions as well. With that said, I'd really like to thank all of the scholars for providing us your time, your knowledge tonight, and then I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight as well. Certainly bringing communities from a distance closer together like this on an online platform, and getting, you know, the general questions answered, and seeking more wisdom and knowledge through the month of Muharram during the tragedy of Karbala, and understanding a lot deeper into the religion, I think is very important. And in closing, you know, just like to thank everybody for participating. Inshallah, we can continue this in the future if time permits. Yeah, everybody have a good night.
Assalamu alaikum wa ahsantum.
Salam.
السلام عليك يا حجة الله في أرضه السلام عليك يا عين الله في خلقه السلام عليك يا نور الله الذي يهتدي به المهتدون ويفرج به عن المؤمنين السلام عليك أيها المهذب الخائف السلام عليك أيها الغني الناصر السلام عليك أيها المهذب الخائف السلام عليك أيها الغني الناصر السلام عليك يا سفينة النجاة السلام عليك يا أين الحياة يا أين
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي علت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين